Hello, everyone. Welcome back. So we're going to go ahead and get started on our next topic here, modern monarchs, and how these modern monarchs in the 1700s played a huge role in Western civilization history. So as just a reminder, a review that we've done is we've kind of started with the Middle Ages, just to kind of give a brief overview, talking about what life was like, and then the events that helped trigger the end of the Middle Ages, the Black Death, and how that changed so much of the power structure and when we moved into the Renaissance a little bit. But this is where, kind of for History 111, kind of the heart of the course really gets going, where you begin to really understand what the modern world is all about, and with specific rulers and names of people. In the History 111 class, the first couple lectures, I didn't give you the names of too many people. In this lecture, you're going to start to get some names of some very important monarchs, and you're going to want to know about them, what they did. I'm going to set everything up for you here in a minute. So you're also going to start using your textbook a little bit more. Specifically, this is going to be material in chapter 15 in your textbook. And when we get to a certain point in this lecture, in this series of lectures, I'll kind of show you how to use your book a little bit in terms of those primary sources. If it's not in this video, it's going to be in the very next video. So just pay attention for that. All right, so what are the modern monarchs? How does all this work? What do I want you to know? Let's set up the objectives, right? I always want you to know what are the key objectives I want you to know. So let's set it up here on our next slide. So there's basically three major types of monarchies in the modern world, in the mid-late 1600s into the early mid 1700s. And there are these three: constitutional monarchy, which is also known as parliamentary monarchy, absolute monarchy, and Eastern absolute monarchs. And I kind of put where you see each one of them mainly focused, right? So when you think of constitutional monarchy, we mainly think of England. Absolute monarch, we think of France, and Eastern absolutism, Russia, Prussia, and Austria, right? And there are other examples as well, but we're not going to talk about everything. It's going to be the first two, constitutional monarch and absolute monarch, that we're going to focus most on. And essentially, what I need you to know on those two, the key objectives, is number one, how did it develop? How did each system develop? Who are the key people that made England into a constitutional monarch, right? Who are they? What role did they play? And how did England become a constitutional monarch? And then you're going to have to be able to describe it, right? What is a constitutional monarch? What does it make? How is it different than, well, an absolute monarch? And then you'll need to know the same thing for absolutism. In an absolute monarch, who are the key people who helped develop absolutism? And then after that, what are the characteristics of absolutism, right? What makes an absolute monarch an absolute monarch? I'll touch on Eastern absolutism as well, but it's really the first two that I want to focus on the most in my series of lectures here on this. So definitely that's the key objective, right? Understanding how each one develops, who are the key people who allow to develop each one. There'll be a lot of names, a lot of kings you'll need to know. You can have, a number of quiz questions, and I'll kind of give you some examples as well you can come up with. One of your assignments that I kind of put out early is just to come up with questions you think might come up on the quiz, and you kind of put them out yourself, and you'll see that as well coming up. And so you could get a lot of questions from these lectures, right? And then same thing for absolute monarch. I mean, this is going to make more sense, obviously, as we go through it, but I do want to make sure you understand the key objectives. All right, so let's go to our next slide, which is just kind of a map. And so just to give you an idea where all these places are again. So again, when we talk about France over here in the purple, we're going to be focused a lot there. England, of course, will be focused a lot here. And when I say these Eastern absolute monarchs, those are sometimes people say, what's Prussia? Where's Austria and all that? Russia, and this kind of peak green over here, Prussia in the brown, and Austria in the green. And we'll be talking about all of these nations all semester. We'll probably focus more about England and France in the earlier part of the semester, but we'll definitely hit Austria and Prussia and Russia and several other areas as well. Italy, obviously, all these major countries of Western civilization. All right, and for those of you who aren't aware, Prussia, you look at that. Isn't that where Germany is? And yeah, we'll talk about that later in the semester as well. All right, so let's start with some key words that I want you to know. And so here's our first set of keywords. You're going to get some more names and people you need to know, and you can write all these down, and then we'll kind of go from there to talk about how constitutional monarchy develops. So this is the first thing you need to know. How does constitutional monarchy develop in England, right? That's step one. How does it develop in England? And so as you get these words down and I talk about them, you want to get the details as well. Remember, you're not just writing the keywords. You have to be able to explain this. If this comes up in an ID or in an essay, you need to be able to explain, how did constitutional monarchy develop? And I'm also going to kind of show you there's like a little chart you could use at the end to help you out with some of this. So Parliament, right? Let's start with the word Parliament. And so Parliament comes from the French word parler. Now, which simply means to speak. Now, if you think of Parliament in England, Parliament today in England, let me actually show you a picture of this. So make sure you get all these keywords down. I'll pop some of them again up in a minute, but make sure you get them down so you have them. But let me show you a picture of what Parliament looks like today and then explain how it played a role in the eventual development of constitutional monarchy. And again, to be clear, we'll get into this in more detail, but in an absolute monarchy, there's going to be nothing that checks the power of the king. In a constitutional monarchy or parliamentary monarchy, there will be something that checks the power of the king. But one thing I should say right away is it's not going to be, people see the word constitutional monarchy and they think, oh, democracy and voting. No, we're not there yet, right? Who's going to check the power of the king in these constitutional monarchs or parliamentary monarchs? Well, it's going to be nobility. It's not going to be the average person on the street. It's going to be the high nobles. And it has a little bit to do with what's going on in Parliament. So let me show you an image of Parliament. So this is what Parliament looks like today. Now, when we think of Parliament today, Parliament today is like our Congress. People elect Parliament members. They have different parties, and they sit there and they argue with each other. And I don't know, this kind of funny little story I heard once. There are these two red lines in the Parliament in England today. Just if you could see them here on the image. And the story goes that you're not supposed to cross those two red lines when you start to stand up to talk with each other because they're the length of two swords or two long swords or something. So to keep that decorum between the two sides, I don't know, it's just a story I heard once, might be a little bit of an urban legend. Regardless, and that's what Parliament is today. But Parliament back in the beginning started just as, again, a group of nobles, barons, who would speak, parler, to speak. And they would simply give advice to the king on how to behave and how to act and what they think they could do, kind of like a cabinet. The king could do what he wants to do, but initially that's what Parliament seemed to be. Over the years in England, Parliament will develop an important power. Now, when I say this is going back 1300 BC. This is hundreds of years before we're even talking about constitutional monarchy. And so Parliament will develop these powers, one of which was to collect taxes. They're not going to decide so much who to tax and how much to tax, but they are going to be responsible for collecting taxes. Again, this is very different than Parliament today. It's going to evolve dramatically over the hundreds of years we're talking about. But that's essentially what role Parliament had. And you do want to remember that. That's going to become important later, that they are the ones who would collect taxes. Now, what ends up happening is this, in terms of the chain of events that helps to lead to constitutional monarchy. You had a queen of England named Queen Elizabeth, right? Queen Elizabeth dies in the year 1603. She came from a very famous line called the Tudor family, and that was those words I had already put there. I covered that in History 110. It's a great little story. And so, the Tudor family, she is the last of the Tudor line. She was known as the Virgin Queen, not that she was, but rather that she never got married and she never had children, and she was the last of that family line. And when she died, that starts the domino effect that essentially pushes England into a constitutional monarchy and makes it very hard for them to become an absolute monarchy. And the reason has to do with who becomes the king after Elizabeth. This guy named James the First. So James the First, he is from a different family. He's not from the Tudor family. He's from what we call the Stuart family. It's a different family line. And Elizabeth appointed James to be her heir to the throne because she didn't have a son. It's a long story of why she does this. You don't even know all the details on that, but it had to do with some family dynamics. Apparently, she killed his mom because his mom was trying to overthrow her, marry Queen of Scots. And so it's a long story, which you don't need all the details on. But she picks this guy from a different family, obviously, to be the next heir in line. The other issue is he's not even British. He's from Scotland. And so right off, when he becomes the new King of England in 1603, the people in England are not going to look at James the First with as much admiration as they would somebody if Elizabeth had her own child and came from the same family line, right? I don't know how much you know about England and Scotland, but there's a lot of tension there. And so here's kind of an outsider coming in, and this outsider, James the First, comes in and goes, I want to be an absolute monarch, and he wants to have this firm control and not ask anybody for their opinion and all of this. But the nobles and really even the people in England are going to be, you, James, are you kidding me? You're not even from England, and you're from a different family line. And so that's where you're going to start to see the development of why England becomes a constitutional monarchy as opposed to an absolute monarchy. It's one of those what ifs. We'll never know if England had a series of other kings just from England and from the Tudor family line, if it could have ever developed into an absolute monarch. But this is the kind of definitely one of those dominoes that pushes them towards more of a constitutional monarchy, is just having a new king from the outside. All right, so keep that point in mind. And then what happens? Now, another issue that's going to come up is going to be religion. By now, I think you need to know that England is a Protestant nation. And as we go through this Stuart family line, one of the issues is going to come up is as some of the Stuart family members are going to be Catholic, and that's going to create an issue as well in terms of England, because if England is primarily Protestant and some of these Stuarts are going to be very more pro-Catholic, that was a big conflict at the time as well. All right, so that's James. That's all you really need to know about him, right? And he's going to, try to claim absolute ruler. No one's really going to appreciate him very much, and this is going to go until about the 1620s, right? And then he's going to die, and he's going to be replaced by his son. His son is named Charles the First, right? And Charles the First, he's an interesting figure as well. He comes in, and Charles the First comes in around 1625, just double checking the exact date. And one of the things is, again, you don't need to memorize exact dates for all of these folks that I gave you in that initial list of names. So yes, Charles the First comes into power 1625. As long as you remember early 1600s, you're fine. You're never going to get a quiz question. What year did Charles the First come into power? You are going to get a question like, what family line was James the First part of, right? And then that's for short answer questions. In terms of IDs and essays, you would need to give a lot more examples and details. If you have an ID or an essay on all this, you have to explain all these things, right? So again, and if any of this part is ever unclear, just shoot me an email. I'm always happy to meet with students online, Zoom, whatever, to make sure everything's clear for you. So anyways, who's Charles the First? Well, Charles the First, he comes in, and once again, he wants to be an absolute monarch, but he takes things a step further. He disbands Parliament, and he tells this Parliament in England, you guys can't meet. I don't even want you to meet. And of course, the Parliament in England get very upset about this, but hey, he's the king. What are you going to do? And so this starts to create a lot of tensions, even more so tensions, between the nobles in England and the Stuart family line. There's already been some of that before. And so here Charles and the nobles are, at each other's throat a bit. There's also going to, again, be slowly the issue of, the issue of religion that's going to play even a bigger role as we move forward. But eventually, the nobles in England, or actually I should say Charles, has a problem eventually. And the problem Charles eventually has is the taxes. Because if he disbands Parliament, he's also alienated the group of people who help collect a lot of the taxes in England, and eventually starts to run into some financial problems. And after, about a decade of the Parliament not meeting, Charles realizes that he needs to call them back. But when he needs to call them back, that's going to open the door for a massive conflict in England. And it is through this massive conflict that we're going to see the birth of a constitutional monarchy in England. So what is that massive conflict? Well, that's what we're going to pick up on the next lecture here. All right, so we'll keep going on this in the next lecture with more Stuarts and more development of constitutional monarchy. So you can just click on the next one and keep on going. All right, here we go.